So here we go, stop share. And let me just make sure that went through. All right, and we are live. Go, stop share.
All right, so do you guys see our presentation?
Yes, we do.
All right.
Well, very good. Thanks for joining us, David. And tell me your name again.
Matt Fagala. Yeah, we've got a introduction slide for Matt as well. So
awesome, cool. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us. This is our third speaker series of the fall semester. We're super happy to have David here discussing the dark web from NTP. This is a local cybersecurity company here in St. Louis. We're super happy to have him here. David, take it away.
Hey, thank you very much. Thanks for having us. We're going to be talking about cyber trends, current trends that we're seeing out there in the industry right now, as well as the dark web. We're kind of going to go on some of these different topics, and we'll tell some stories about some incident response cases that we've worked recently in the region. So, advance. There you go. My name is David Wren. I'm the president, CEO, and founder of NTP. We're a cybersecurity firm here in the St. Louis region. We are 21 years old. We partner with a lot of different organizations to help them protect their identity and their brand. We do basically a SOC as a service. In the St. Louis region and for the eastern side of Missouri, I'm the president of InfraGard, which is an independent group that's kind of sponsored by the FBI, the Office of the Public Sector of the FBI. I'm on multiple cybersecurity boards, advisory boards, part of the FBI Citizens Academy, as well as do virtual CISO for many different types of organizations. Together today, I have Matt Fagala with me as well.
Hello, Matt Fagala. So 20 plus years in IT operations, data center management, as you can see. Spent most of my time working for financial institutions. And then in the last, 6-7 years, I've pivoted over to cybersecurity. Also part of the InfraGard here in St. Louis. I do some advisory work for things like Secure World and some local events that come through on occasion. And you can find me on the Twitters, the LinkedIns, all that good stuff, Discord servers. So I'm kind of all over. So easy to find me. And I have a little bit of a connection to Maryville too. My wife teaches over there. So you might see my name over there.
And, whenever you talk about cybersecurity, regardless if it's the dark web or just regular, we all have users, and we refer to them as layer 8. And, back in the old days, we talked about ID10T errors. However, we do talk about a paradigm shift that we really want to empower our users to be, instead of the weakest link, the first line of defense. So security awareness training is really, really critical, especially these days. And we'll kind of get into some COVID-related scams and some other stuff a little later. But wanted to mention that to everybody, because there's a lot of users out there that need a little extra support, a little extra help.
So tactics, I always like to start with credentials, because unfortunately it's still the biggest thing we see. Whether it's phishing or going after credentials in the cloud, stealing tokens to gain access to like an EC2 instance in Amazon. It's still one of the most sought after things, because it's easy to get for the most part. A lot of times you can just ask, or people leave things misconfigured and it's easy to find. So, I kind of talk about this Capital One breach. I put this in there because it was when that breach first happened, and Capital One was in the news for it. There was not a lot of details about how it happened, and more has come out now over the last year about how they did it. And actually, it was a not very well-known service, unless you are very familiar with how AWS functions. It was a very unknown service that they used to gain access to some tokens, some credentials. And because of that breach, AWS actually updated that service. They actually came out with a version 2 of this IMB, I can't remember what it's called, but service, because part of that was related to that. So good article about how that breach happened there, and we'll pass these out, I'm sure. At the end.
And we also have some slides later on too that are going to kind of refer to credential harvesting, but that's still the biggest thing that we see that's going on out in the marketplace.
So how are they happening? That kind of leads back, again, credentials. You look at these top pieces up here, phishing, compromise or stolen credentials, brute force. So usually finding, an email address or user ID, that's super easy. A lot of that stuff can be found on the dark web. If you're an Office 365 user, you can use tools like Mail Sniper to go out and find, logins and email addresses, things like that. We still see a ton of ransomware and malware. Those kind of go together. A lot of times malware is the initial starting point and then delivers ransomware later. Hacking and some of this other stuff are really pretty low. Really it's the phishing and credentials, and then, some type of malware delivery that can usually turn into ransomware. That's usually what we see.
And quite often some of the other things lead into the ransomware. And one of the things, I think ransomware is so 2018, right? I think that companies should not really be getting ransomware anymore because there are good technologies out there that prevent it. And it's just really updating your antivirus and endpoint protection to one of the top 3 next-gen solutions.
Yeah, Microsoft's done a pretty good job of battling that back, with some of the built-in tools like Windows Defender, but unfortunately, you still see a lot of old OSs out there. We run into it all the time. So
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So threats to the business, again, work credentials leading to a breach. And these are just some examples of some of the things you see over and over again. The mail services one, I had another one of those today, phishing email that was brand new. You go out and you look at the links, you look at the landing page that they're taking you to, and virus total, hybrid analysis, none of the tools we use knew about it, brand new. And ironically, that one was hosted by, they had popped a WordPress server for a chiropractor up in Niagara Falls. And that person probably doesn't even know that they're hosting, phishing credentials harvesting site. And so I actually called them and emailed them. I said, hey, in an investigation today, I came across your site and it looks like somebody's gotten a hold of it. Call me if you have questions or talk to your IT guy. I'm sure they'll find the malicious site sitting in there. So, we see this all the time where, again, credentials going after banks. And once we get into these slides later about phishing and the phishing kits and things like that, you'll kind of see how easy it is to stand some of this stuff up, some of the infrastructure up to attack people with.
And the other thing, going back to layer 8, is we really want to educate users to not use the same passwords and credentials for work as they do their home or personal use. We see that all the time, or else they'll use a variant of the same password on multiple different service providers or solutions out there. So a good password management solution like LastPass or something like that would go a long way to help a lot of people.
So
different types of social engineering. We talk about phishing and spear phishing all the time. Man-in-the-middle attacks, especially on Wi-Fi networks and out in public networks. Phishing and smishing. Phishing is over the phone, smishing via text. We actually do social engineering exercises, and we've been very successful in just calling into companies and asking for maybe a year's worth of phone records and start opening the dialogue like that. And it's surprising how often we do get information back from companies just based on asking for it. Mining social media, when we do human compliance exercises, we usually go to social media to see what we could find. We had a large bank that we saw one of the branch managers was on vacation. So we went in and asked for that person. And we knew they wouldn't be there. And we told them that we needed access to their computer, and we actually got access to it. So it's kind of interesting when you put different modes of these social engineering attacks together, the information and access that you can get.
So people really gave you their phone records?
Oh,
We called one of the high rises downtown, and we asked for a year's worth of phone records, and we got them. And then we followed that up and asked for some other bills that we got. And then we had them send us to you've been hacked at ntpinc.com, and they send the email there. So it's kind of interesting. We take those experiences. We put that together in a security awareness training class that we deliver in person. And while we're in person, we kind of give those examples and say, hey, this happened. This actually happened here at this location. So when we're doing that training for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, with the theme of, you're the target going after individuals, the pandemic has been great for hackers. They love to use a crisis. FBI stats are saying that since March, there's been a 400% increase in attacks. And there's Zoom bombing. That's a term now. That wasn't a big thing until everybody was on Zoom and on Teams and these video conferencing. Social media again. You may have seen the Elon Musk thing over the summer. I think it was back in July, where really simple hack. All they did was get credentials, for some Twitter accounts, and then threw out some tweets and said, hey, I'm supporting this person. Send us some money to this this Bitcoin address, and quick and easy, couple $100,000. So something as simple as that. If you can just get an account, high profile account, make up a story, and you got money coming in. It's crazy how easy some of this stuff is. People working remote, those computers now that were never meant to survive on their own are now, not behind the corporate firewalls, not behind the corporate DLPs. A lot of those products that they had that were protecting them, now they're on these home networks that are much more exposed. And so we're relying on maybe an endpoint product or maybe a web filter that goes back through a VPN, but that's not the case in a lot of places. So again, the bad guys know, a lot of these machines are unprotected. We just got to get a foothold, and we might be able to get access to information. So
the other thing, when you look at remote workers, it really did throw a big crunch in the alertness, right? So when you do security awareness training and you're teaching to be alert and aware of your surroundings and alert and aware of the emails and everything that you're clicking on, you take the person out of the workplace and you put them in their home. And then if they have a spouse and somebody else living in the home that maybe is going to college or school, it really does create a big distraction. And the bad guys took advantage of that clearly. But there also is that lack of visibility. And there's multiple ways to get visibility into those assets. But again, some of that is either a next-gen endpoint solution or routing all that traffic and communication through a cloud environment to where we can capture and inspect the traffic.
Yep. A lot of companies weren't prepared, unfortunately, for that. So again, more information on FBI, rise in business, email compromise. We're going to talk a little bit about that here coming up. A lot of it related to pandemic-related emails. We'll go into a couple examples, but we won't spend a lot of time on some of these.
We have a lot of these examples, and so we'll kind of go through quite a few of them. But this is your typical stuff. And this is also a good educational tool. And the educational tool doesn't only apply to workers, co-workers. This could go to parents and grandparents as well, because it's kind of interesting, and we'll talk a little bit about it again, how people are tracked and targeted and the reasons they're targeted by the bad guys. But anything that's kind of generic or in general, poor grammar, obviously, but just got to watch any links that are embedded in an email.
Yeah. And we see these, again, all the time. A lot of times they'll make mistakes too, where they'll leave the current date field in there or the field they're supposed to fill in. That's a really big flag. See that one a lot. So, but yeah, we won't spend too much. Yeah. Poor grammar again, PDF, where, a link where it takes you to another link that has a PDF link on that page, whether you're going, that's a good way to hide from the spam filters or the filters where it's trying to get you to go through multiple steps on a page. So that's another one we see a lot of. Yeah. From everybody, service desk, you don't know.
Yeah.
like to try from everybody.
Even the Microsoft Windows one is still huge, where you know, a lot of people get that, and even people at home starting to get that quite often, and they think grandma might think, hey, there's a problem with my computer, and Microsoft reached out to me and they're helping me.
Yeah, we got a slide coming up about that too.
Yeah.
Texting, have you guys seen this? You gotten a text about COVID related things that Yep. So I still get the IRS calls. I know you get them.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
your IRS account or your tax account's been suspended. You need to call it or hit one or whatever. I still get those all the time too.
I get the IRS call all the time. Like
Yeah.
it seems like every day now. It's like, hey, like I put money. What are you talking? Like, why do you want my IRS information?
Yeah, a lot of it happens. Generally, IRS happens in April and October for our extensions and corporate returns, but this year, because of COVID, the returns were delayed. So that's why there's a big increase in that right now.
Good point. Yeah. So talked about, building a phishing email. It's so easy now. There's so many kits and easy things out there, even just on the regular web, instead of having to jump on the dark web to find them. The tools are just becoming so easy to put together. A lot of times, it's just here's step one, step two, and then copy and paste this in and, off you go. So, and again, building fake web pages to match, current sites out there. Here's an example of somebody just copying the Facebook login page, drop this out, let somebody get them to go to it, put their credentials in, again, credentials harvested. So, bank accounts, same thing. It's so easy to build.
Several examples of that to just see those side by side like this is pretty interesting, because it just shows how easy it is, even for somebody in the industry or even someone in HR who's well trained to see something like this. It's not surprising how often these are, somebody falls for this.
Yeah.
So that's why it's kind of important to, look at behavior analytics on network traffic and traffic flows and access, so that you can identify through monitoring and tools, as soon as these changes or unusual behaviors and logins start to happen, you can stop it. Another one is even email credentials, watching those to make sure if there's any rule changes in Office 365 or with the email provider, if those rules are changing, who's making those changes. So we have a tool that monitors for those as well, that we alert on.
Yeah. So that kind of leads us into business email compromise. Again, year after year, this makes a lot of money for the attackers. It's crazy how much this continues to go up and up. And you would think that with things like multi-factor authentication, which really cuts down on this, that more and more companies would be rushing to put this in. But we still come across a lot of companies that, oh yeah, we haven't put multi-factor in. It's on our list. I was like, well, make it a priority, because this is happening and you might not even know it. I worked with somebody recently where they had it wasn't them that got compromised. It was a vendor, a third party that they worked closely with that got compromised. It was their Office account that got compromised. And that bad guy was just watching the emails going back and forth between the two companies, and waited and kind of learned the patterns about when invoices were sent. And you see this a lot where they just watch and then they kind of insert themselves into the stream. So they knew that on the 15th of every month or whatever it was, there was an invoice that was paid. They waited, hid that email from the person, and then sent their own invoice. And it looked exactly the same. It came from the same person, everything, and that came from that company. All they did was change the email or the routing information for the bank account. Nobody caught it. It went out, the payment was made. They got a call from a bank in Florida and said, hey, we're about to send up $250,000 over to the Middle East. Are you sure you want to send this? And they said, no, stop. We did not send that. And then when they started investigating, they found out, okay, this company we do business with was compromised and they were phishing us. Had that bank not called, that money was gone, because once it's overseas, you have 72 hours to recover it, because once it's gone, they start laundering it and you can't recover it. So perfect example of how much of a problem this is and why this continues to be such a big issue.
There's a couple other stories that happened recently. One of them was a company that paid one of those invoices, and it was in the St. Louis region. and they didn't realize that the money went to the wrong person until 30 days after the money was sent. And so it was just totally lost. And that was over $170,000. There's another one where a construction company did some work for a client. They invoiced the client. That was intercepted on the client's end. The client, then the bad actor communicated with the client and said, if you pay by ACH, we'll give you a 15% discount. Is that of interest to you? They responded, but they're talking to the bad actor. And of course they said, yes, they made the payment. Then a couple weeks later, the vendor, the construction company, reached out to them to check on the payment status because it was late. And they said they had already paid it by ACH. And they're like, we don't accept ACH. And they discovered that it was a fraud. The thing is, the vulnerability was on the client side, not the construction company side. So the construction company side still wants their payment. And so that kind of creates a little rift that probably, unfortunately, could lead into litigation. But then they've got to do forensics and to prove that it was on the client side where this error happened, not on the side of the vendor. Business email compromise, again, it's the top type of C-suite fraud in our region for the examples that we just gave. The other type of business email compromise that's really high end that's happening right now is actually love interest. And this typically happens with seniors, and these bad guys, the threat actors, they're actually monitoring obituaries. And so whenever they see somebody in an obituary, they'll actually do research through social media to find out if they are somebody with financial means, and then they will figure out how to start a communication with them. And then they will start asking or soliciting funds so that they can come and visit, or funds for some other purpose. That's huge, something that we got to talk to mom and dad and grandma and grandpa about.
Yeah. If you Google Harvard professor loses retirement fund, it happens to the best of us too. So that's a good example of one of those stories. So yeah, so again, things to teach and talk to everybody about, the email hygiene. This is, again, most of the things that come in start with an email, whether it's, a phishing email or malware right in the email. So we always like to emphasize email. Make sure you're checking, for misspellings, looking at very closely at the links, and making sure. I see one of the common ones we see too is, these domain registrations where they will register a domain that looks very close to the real domain. For example, if it's something that's got an M in it, they'll put two N's next to each other so that as you're reading it quickly, it looks like an M, but it's actually two N's side by side. So, little tricks like that they'll go out and register domains and send them as that company. And then you miss it because it's very, very easy to miss that kind of stuff. So, making sure it's an expected email and just being due diligent on the stuff that's coming in and making sure you are very sure it's them. It never hurts to call, and verify a second way. So
and often whenever we do a phishing exercise, we'll actually get a domain, and then we'll try to mimic maybe a service provider of that company's, and then we'll buy a certificate for it as well, so that it's a kind of has the appearance of a valid domain for a while. All right, so this is a familiar slide. I'm sure most of it, hopefully a lot of you guys have seen it. But the surface web, which is, what's indexed by Google and a lot of other search engines out there, is really only about 4 to 5% of the global internet. The deep web is the biggest chunk. It's probably runs about 88 to 90% of the internet. And that's data that could be on our laptops or our computers, research in universities, company databases, anything that is not accessible to the surface web crawler. So it's protected behind a firewall, but it's there for use for the authorized users of that data. The dark web, which is where all this bad stuff happens, right? Or a lot of bad stuff. That actually is only the same about as the surface web, 4 to 5%. But man, that 4 to 5% is an awful big space. And, you know, it's like there's stuff on there that you can dream. There's stuff that you can't even dream about that is on there that is super, super bad stuff. There's marketplaces on there that you can buy just about anything and everything. Kind of really started around the drug trade. I usually like to say, who are the bad actors? And a lot of us know that, you know, there's state actors. There are some individuals. The state sponsored stuff tends to be some of the worst and some of the scariest as far as fraud and IP theft. And then it is the new mafia and organized crime. And these guys are really, really good at what they do. So they're constantly working. And sometimes we got a story a little later that, you know, they're dressing in suits and going into high rises, and that's where their job is. But, you know, they're very well organized.
Yeah. So,
I heard these organizations are like multi-$100 million orgs.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like huge, you know, they have a whole, you know, enterprise structure, you know, CEO, CTO, they have all these different layers that you would see in a regular corporation.
Oh yeah, we got a slide here in a few minutes that we'll touch back on that, on how they recruit and find talent to do, you know, the hacking, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. So if you haven't ever used, you know, a browser to get out to the dark web, it's become so easy now. It used to be a little bit of a chore to get on and build, you know, your onion router or your browser to go, you know, be able to access it now. Now it's just an app on your iPhone or your Android. It's super easy. You just download the app and then you can, you know, you can do a lot of configs on there, pick how many circuits you want it to use and pick how secure you want it to be. So super easy nowadays just to pop on there and you know, go do some surfing across onion sites. And then, you know, this isn't even as popular as it used to be. They continue to shift and change and you know, hide the way they get access to a lot of this stuff, you know, using chat servers and, you know, old relay servers and things like that. But still,
there's organizations that we've gone to on incident response cases. I think it was one, I think it was a Citrix server vulnerability.
Yeah.
That was pretty popular back in January, February, where the bad actors would just get on that and they would use it, set up and create a Tor router and use it to bounce off of.
Yeah. So they'll create their own nodes. Yeah. Pass through. Yeah. So the marketplaces, like he was talking about, we'll go through a couple quick examples, but like he was saying, anything and anything you can think of is available and up for sale. You know, when I worked at some of the banks in the past, I would frequently go out and search for our credit card BIN numbers to see if any of the credit cards we owned in our membership were out there. And I always found them. There's always at least a couple that I got hits on. Thankfully, it wasn't large hits because that'd be a huge red flag, but just finding onesie twosies where somebody's card had been popped, super easy to find. And then, you know, if you want to,
with the election coming up,
if you want a good voter database, they're all out there. So you can imagine that our voting systems and, you know, things that we store all of our databases in for the balloting and all that, you think that's secure, but gotta wonder.
Yeah, and so it's kind of interesting too when you think about this, because if you think if a state actor got a hold of this, just the collateral that they could send to the database and either ask for donations for a candidate or comments on a race and start to collect intelligence, it could be pretty powerful. Yeah. The other thing that I really wanted to talk about, because this is on many of the dark web marketplaces, is you see these 5-star ratings and a trust level of 1. So just like eBay or Amazon, there's going to be user ratings from both sides, the buyer and the seller. So the higher star rating of seller is going to cost a little bit more for the data, because that data is probably going to be either newer, fresher, and less circulated. And then when you buy this type of information, quite often you're buying it for time use with the first right of refusal. That means you're getting to use the data first. You get to use it for so many hours. And then at the end of that time, you either re-up first right of refusal, you re-up for an additional block of time, or you forfeit that and now other people are able to buy it. And as additional people start buying it, the price does start to come down. I always think about the Yahoo data breach that happened years ago. There's still a lot of those Yahoo people that are getting emails today saying, hey, this is your password. I know what you've been doing on your computer. Send me $750 and we'll keep this our little secret. And quite often, I mean, we get maybe in a month, 1, 2, 3 phone calls into the office about stuff like that, which is just kind of a bully tactic, right? Or extortion.
Yeah. In the SOC, we used to get those calls all the time.
Yeah.
People would forward us an email. I didn't do this. No, they're trying to scare you into paying you.
Right.
And I would go out and search those Bitcoin addresses. They always put them in there.
Yeah.
And you'd be amazed how much money's in those. The people have just blatantly, okay, I'll pay you.
Yeah.
Just don't do it. So even those quick, little, easy extortion tries, you know, they're lucrative. So, you know, if you need, again, anything you need a French passport, you need a German ID, it's all out there. And then, so want to talk a little bit about ransomware. So the Maze group is interesting because they were one of the first ones that kind of took ransomware and extortion and kind of put them together, meaning that a lot of the early ransomware was just kind of spray and pray. They'd throw it out there, encrypt a bunch of machines, and if you called in and said, hey, can you unencrypt my stuff, they would work with you and come up with a price to give you the decryption keys. Maze kind of took a different approach where they got all the stuff that they encrypted, and then they stole pieces of your data during that process, during the encryption process or before it. So they had your data, and they usually would look up a contact info on the company. And if you didn't contact them right away saying, hey, we need the decryption keys, we'll pay, they would start contacting you and saying, well, we have your data. We're going to release a little bit just to prove that we're serious. And they had a site you could go to and say, hey, look, we got this data. Either pay us now or we're going to continue releasing this until we dump it all out. And then, you know, so they're kind of shaming you for not paying them. So, you know, a much more scary tactic because, you know, in the past, like I said, you didn't necessarily lose data. They just encrypted everything on your servers, but stealing it and then forcing you to pay and saying, we're going to release it. You know, adding that extortion element really changed a lot of things and you put fear into people and made them pay.
Yeah.
So. And
a lot of it, they've written to actually exfiltrate and then encrypt. And so we don't say never negotiate with them, but if they open up a line of communication, it can help buy time while you restore backups and everything. Yeah. So they will ask for, or we would ask for proof of life, basically, or hey, proof that you have the data. They would supply some data, and then we'll actually research that data to make sure that it wasn't something that was already available out either on the dark web or in the public domain, something that they put together just to kind of validate that, yeah, they were successful or not successful in extracting that data. But we've worked a couple of Maze incidents in the last probably 3 weeks. And some of them those two were pretty sizable, the organizations. One was a major company here in St. Louis, and one was over in the Illinois area.
Yeah. And then I always like to stress with ransomware, test your backups, because sometimes that's your only option is to go back to backup, because you're not guaranteed the keys, if you pay, that the keys are going to work, you know. And now you've got the government stepping in. I don't know if you were talking about that Krebs on security article earlier, where now the government is saying, if you pay, you could be aiding and abetting terrorists by paying the ransomware fee. And so now they got that whole element coming in. It's like, oh, great. So
trying to figure out that I think it's going to be interesting to see what legislation is going to happen, because, there's quite a few of the, I'll say ruling class that would like to see penalties tied to companies that actually pay the ransom. So we'll see if that goes through or not, but there's a lot more talk about it today than there ever has been.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for sure. But we still see, when we go in and talk to companies, a lot of companies will say, yeah, we have backups. And one of the questions I always ask, when's the last time you tested them? Oh, a year ago or never. And I'm like, so, and it's a scary thought that might be the only thing that saves you in a situation like this. And we've seen it. So
I think that's kind of interesting whenever you look at and say, all right, well, if the government wants to penalize or charge you a fee or a fine for paying a ransom, it's almost like a little backwards in my thought is there should be an incentive to get good and valid backups so that you can restore. And there's a lot of small to mid-sized companies that don't have a good backup policy. And it's kind of important to look at the industry standard is a 3-2-1, 3 copies, 2 separate medias, one of them located off-site, and then do DR and BC continuity exercises where you're restoring that environment and bringing it back up. And sometimes there's a short period of a window that you have to work within to get operations back up and going.
So ransomware again. So now we have something called RAAS, ransomware as a service. You don't even have to be proficient in using the ransomware. You can just hire somebody to do it for you. You just give them a target and say, go, I'll pay you this much. And we expect we'll make this much money back. So they're getting very good at this, understanding the amount of money they're going to make off of a ransomware campaign and learning what they can make, what they can charge for this service. So crazy business model nowadays.
And along those lines, in the marketplaces on the dark web, you can purchase any kind of hacking. You could actually hire a hacker to target a specific person or company or organization. In the St. Louis region in the last 3 or 4 years, we've actually had where a school student, both high school and middle school students, were able to get on a dark web and order a DDoS attack against their school. And it was timed where it would happen within a certain hour that they had an online test, and it would actually take down the school's network. And some of them have been caught because they told their friends about it, and I think one of them still to this day has not yet been caught, but eventually I'm sure that some of the local authorities will knock on their door because typically you're going to get caught when you're bragging about it.
Yeah, we kind of touched on the Zoom bombing earlier, but again, we've this on the dark web. You see these accounts for sale. They're starting to aggregate up collections of accounts and actually sell access to Zoom accounts, so you can purposely just be a nuisance and bomb meetings or listen in. So again, Zoom bombing not a thing until this year, really.
We saw Zoom in the news this week too, right?
Yes, we did. Probably not appropriate for this one.
Yeah, right. So this is kind of interesting. Whenever you're looking for a job, keep in mind, so we were talking about the mafia earlier. There's a cybersecurity firm. There was a cybersecurity firm in downtown Seattle, and it was in one of the high-rise buildings, and they recruited off the local college campuses. And they were recruiting students as interns or first-year jobs to work in a SOC environment and also to do penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, and basically a cybersecurity firm. And they had a dress code. Everything was very well organized. They had managers who had managers, regional vice presidents. And then one day the FBI went in, knocked on their door, raided the place, and they confiscated all the computers because it was actually an illegal organization. So think about that whenever you're looking for a job, that you want to make sure, hey, this is a valid company, and check references or check the industry to make sure that they're reputable. That instance, there was a Fortune 500 company here in the St. Louis region that the FBI contacted them, and 2 of their IP addresses, their internal IP addresses, were found on those servers in Seattle. And we went in and investigated that and did forensics to determine if data had actually left those servers. In this case, they did not, but it's kind of important to note that that is one of the things that this organized crime is doing, is recruiting from college campuses for cyber talent.
And like you were saying earlier, you know, it looks very professional, looks like a normal operation, but unless you really know what they're up to, it's can be. So scams, you know, talking about, you know, jobs, again, the pandemic has been great for hackers. A lot of fake job advertisements out there trying to get, you know, scam a little bit of money out of people. There's an example from Indeed right there. But generally, a lot of these scams would involve somebody asking for money to do like a background check or to check your credit or something along those lines. They're asking for that up front. No company is going to ask you to pay something to start working with them. It's the other way around, but people still have fallen for it. A lot of fake charities have popped up with the COVID, you know, related themes and things like that. If you, again, research, if you give to any charities, research them well. You know, there's some examples of, you know, Better Business Bureau, Wise Giving Alliance, Charity Navigator. By the end of May, and I need to update these numbers, but there were, you know, over 500,000 domains registered with that were COVID related. 86,000, it's probably over 100,000 now, were flagged as risky, whether that was a scam or used for, you know, a hack attempt or something along those lines. The pop-up computer support scams, we still see these all the time. It's like, there's sites that track this now, and there's actually a guy that's made it his mission to take these things down. If you look on YouTube for Jim Browning, you'll find him. That's his mission, is going after these guys. And unfortunately, a lot of these call centers, these fake call centers, are actually in India, and he's had a hard time getting the Indian police to go in and shut these things down. But he's infiltrated several of them. He's got under their computers, he's got into their webcams, he's got into their security systems, into their email, and he does this all on YouTube, so you can see how you know, what he's done, and it's actually pretty interesting. The fake online websites, again, you know, buying masks, you know, PPE, things like that, where you go out, you pay for it, and it never shows up. That was really big in March and April, when everybody was scrambling to get, you know, toilet paper and masks and all the supplies. That's probably not as bad now, but again, you know, taking advantage of those situations with COVID. So we're getting down toward the nitty gritty here. So with the scams, I always like this. They do this with the college kids. What age group falls victim to more scams? Anybody care to guess?
I would like to think probably 60 and up. Hopefully it's not our age on the lower end of the scale.
It's a good guess.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm with my parents calling me all the time, I would have said the same, but it's actually 20 to 29. So that's the highest. Now,
I was gonna say younger people. My sister actually, she sent me a screenshot. She got a text message from some foreign number, and it was like, oh yeah, we sent you, or your Google account has been hacked. We sent you a code to reset your account.
Yep.
Please send us the code so that you can reset your account. And she sent them the code and then texted me about it a half hour later and was like, oh yeah, do you, my sister's younger than me. So, oh yeah, do you know like what this is about? I was like, no, go change all your passwords.
Yep. Yeah. So millennials are the ones falling for it. Now, Drew was right in that the most money lost is over 80. So that over age group, that higher age group gives away a whole lot more money. Now, maybe that's, you know, circumstances, you know, you don't have as much when you're younger, but yeah, I thought that was an interesting stat, that, you know, that's at the millennials, that they're the ones that are falling for most of them. So talk to your friends and make sure that if they have questions or issues, hey, stop.
And yeah, and always think about mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, because this is a part of the awareness training that we've got to do, because what we look at is securing the internet one person at a time. And if we got to cut off the funding. So there was a case locally in the St. Louis region where there was an elderly lady that was one of the business email compromises of love interest. And she was to the point where she was sending $3,000 and $4,000 a month to this person that she had never met. And it went on for over a year, and they just could not stop her because the relationship was so real to this person. And finally, the family had reached out to their doctor, to her doctor, and then their doctor had reached out to our office to come in and ask permission for us to talk to her, and we did, to show her examples of how they work. And a lot of the messaging is similar, but just know that a lot of times the elderly are lonely, and they look for that connection. So
yep. So this is the last slide, and I always like to kind of cover this anytime we're doing any talk. So, we talk about awareness being very important, and that was, the gist of what we went through today. But on the corporate side, we still go into a lot of companies where we see them not doing the basics needed for detection. Because you can have an IPS, you can have a firewall all day long, but those things are easily bypassed. You have to at least be able to detect it, or be able to rewind and have good logs to go back and see what happened if you missed something. So we always stress, I love the concept of the SOC visibility triad, which was something that Gartner has worked on for a couple of years. There's some great white papers out there about this. You can search for them. If you just search, Google SOC visibility triad, you'll see it. But really what they're talking about is you got to have logging, some kind of a SIM or something that's doing long-term logging. You have to have something that's watching network traffic, doing that network traffic and flow analysis. And then you got to have something on the endpoint. Those three are the most key pieces. You can be missing one of those and still miss something. So we always preach when we go into a business, if you're not doing this at a minimum, there's a good chance you're going to miss something, because a hacker will find those weaknesses and they will exploit them. So our last bit there.
So any questions?
Yeah, people can use the Q&A tool if they want. I know we've had a few come through throughout the presentation, but I know one was actually talking about the government and kind of threatening to fine companies if they actually do pay ransomware, which I know you touched on a little bit. So good job on that. I don't know if you want to go a little bit more in depth about kind of what your stance is, or how you've personally seen that impact companies when they do try to wage the benefits of, okay, do I pay the ransomware and get my data back, or do I just accept with whatever data recovery I have available?
Yeah, it's tough. Ultimately, it's a business decision, right? At the end of the day, I mean, because there have been many cases where the company it's either shut down because we have lost our data, or pay it and take a chance of getting it, staying functional. Unfortunately, a lot of times the bad actors are going to go after the backups first. If they can find you, because backups are all digital now. It used to be you backed everything up to tape, you took the tape and you put it in a vault, right? Or you set it off site. That doesn't happen as much anymore. A lot of that data is on a NAS or some kind of storage device that's online and easy to find. So a lot of times they will go and try to find those backups and get rid of them. The first thing on a lot of the machines they wipe is that volume shadow history, on those computers, so you can't recover back on that one machine. So, a lot of times if they've successfully gotten rid of all that backup data or any way to recover, you don't have an option. It's either pay or try, you shut down. And there's a lot of instances out there where you can go out and find where companies did have to shut down because they didn't have good backups. They had no good way to recover, or their backups were destroyed during the process. So
we of course would say never pay the ransom, right? And an ounce of prevention goes a long way. So we do try to consult. And I had a client recently that had an incident, and we do a lot of proactive monitoring and proactive planning. And to their credit, they even said, if you would have talked to us about this 6 months ago, we would have never done it. But now living through it, we'd never live without it. So it's one of those things where it's kind of a business decision, but it's one of those things. It's not a matter of if, but when. The other thing is, we would also say never reach out on your own behalf. A company should not to negotiate. There's actually a few law firms nationwide that specialize in only this aspect. And it's kind of interesting because not that long ago, we were working with a company that was working with a law firm, and the law firm in negotiating was negotiating with the same people on 3 or 4 different clients' behalfs, which is kind of interesting because they do start to build a little bit of a rapport with them. But yeah.
So can they like work out deals? Oh, like, hey, we're getting you like all this extra money because we're being a liaison to multiple companies you hacked. Can we get them a deal if we get all the money kind of thing?
I think a lot of that does go on, quite frankly. And then the other thing too is from the victim's perspective is, you know, they got to have an idea of what they are or are not going to do right up front, and then how much they communicate that with the people that are going to settle this. Because, you know, we've seen it where the ransom would be multiples of millions going down to hundreds of thousands, going down to tens of thousands. The longer these things, the negotiation goes on, the lower the amount goes, because the bad guys know on the flip side, they may have some things that are pinging out or some communication method in there, but they also know that during this entire time, the company is rebuilding so that they can get back to some form of normal operation.
Yeah, interesting.
Hey, Dave, what's the percentage you would say in higher education that you've seen regarding ransomware?
Well, you know, it's interesting because in the state of Missouri, I believe there are 13 community colleges. And I would say 40% of them were hit in the last couple of years. The biggest one that I remember in the news, well, you know, St. Louis Community College was not that long ago hit. And then prior to that, Crowder College, and these were in the news, is why I'm talking about them. Crowder College was hit. Crowder was hit in March, which I think it was 2 to 3 years ago, which was right during their enrollment season. And that enrollment process, they handled it all summer long manually.
Wow.
Now, we have a slide that we talk about the five most targeted industries. Of course, we know in that top 5, and this won't be in order, but you've got healthcare, you've got financials, which are banks, you have governments, and that governments is typically municipalities or county entities. You also have education. The education is kind of interesting because it's a little bit of a double whammy. The other, because they have a lot of healthcare information, a lot of HIPAA information. They also have financial information. And sometimes that financial information isn't just on the student, it would be the student's parents. When you look at how schools and some of these governments are funded through tax revenue, in the last few years, tax revenues have been down. So they have less money to spend. So it does, Brian, get into a conversation around budget creep, because, you know, you get all these salespeople to go, hey, I got the latest, greatest thing, you need to buy it. It's going to protect you from this.
Right.
But each one of those tools comes with either a subscription or a maintenance agreement that you're going to need to maintain. So if it's not replacing something, or if you can't replace a technology or an expense, you know, it might be worth it to take a step back and slow down and say, what's going to be the best bang for our buck, and how do we stay with the curve or as ahead of the curve as we possibly can and still control that spend.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, that's a long answer to a lot.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of do less. Keep your tool set small and get good at those, because I've seen so many times where companies, especially after an IR event, they take out the pocketbook and they say, here you go, start buying everything you need. And then you get all this glut of tools, and they're all of them half baked, and it doesn't do you any good. So be very careful. Go start with that SOC visibility triad. Do those 3 things, do those well, and you're going to stop 95% of the attacks, right?
And then educate users. And that would be kind of where I open, talking about layer 8 and ID 10T. In the world of IT people, we have a separate training session we do with them. And a lot of that is around, hey, we've got to do a paradigm shift internally about our users, because each of our users really is our client, our customer. So we want to treat them, you know, as if they're our revenue stream, and we want to make sure and empower them, educate them and empower them, because we don't want a company full of happy clickers or natural born clickers. We really want a company full of investigators and reporters, so that when they see something, they say something.
Yeah. So there's a couple of good questions out here. So, you know, Sandy, on the, you know, Wild West of the dark web, you know, how many people get prosecuted? It all depends on how much, you know, how notorious you get. You know, the bigger you get, the bigger the target you're going to, you know, get on your back. And eventually the, you know, governments are going to start coming after you. Unfortunately, there are a lot of non-extradition laws and, you know, bulletproof hosting providers in other countries that make it very difficult to go in and prosecute, because they're giving a little cut of what they make to the government. So the government, you know, keeps them there and allows them to operate. So you do see, you know, a lot of the big ones that once they start to get big and they start to, you know, throw their money around and start to get a little cocky, they eventually do, you know, get, you know, somebody chasing them. You know, Dark Overlord, some of those big ones, Kim.com, you know, these guys that once they get to a certain point, they're getting tracked, and eventually they're going to get taken down. But it's a constant battle. And you'll see a lot of times they work in groups, you know, they'll be spread all over the globe. So it can be difficult to kind of round them all up and go in and get them at the same time. And I know they attempt that. The FBI has done that several times, where, you know, they have to coordinate their hit to get as many as they can to shut a ring down, because they can shut it down in one country, it just pops up someplace else, or they have, you know, backups running someplace else and they just pop right back up. So it's hard to really get, get them, you know, rounded up at the same time. Fintech companies, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on fintech. Yeah, the risk is huge, right? And I'm sure that's probably one of the biggest concerns they have, as opposed to brick and mortar. But I also would just imagine that they're using some of the latest, greatest, best products and tools out there, because even the market value of fintech companies have really taken off compared to legacy companies. I watched a video today on, you know, the financials of like a Wells Fargo and how they've performed in the market over the last few years compared to Visa, MasterCard, compared to some of the top fintech companies, where they've just exploded in value.
Yeah, and they've done a pretty good job with all the regulations and the compliance laws that they have to go through, you know, FFIEC and all those guidelines, GLBA. They do a pretty good job because they get audited, you know, multiple times a year on a lot of that stuff. So ransomware is, in my opinion, is less of a concern in some of the financial institutions as it is in some of the others. But it still happens on occasion, but not as much as you would think.
It would be, yeah, right. It would be more likely that somebody from the mafia would recruit someone and tell them to go get a job there. And then they go get a job there. They're making money at that company, but they're also making money from, you know, the bad guys. And they're infiltrating it really in a old-fashioned way to collect data and IP to extract out of there. So it would be more from a social engineering aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, and then some of the tools we use, man, there's so many out there now. I mean, there's always something, framework popping up. A lot of the ones we use are paid services now because it's a lot easier to just, pay a subscription fee to something like a dark web ID or a Bullfish or a KnowBe4 or something along those lines that's got the framework, everything built for you, and you don't have to maintain it yourself because that is time consuming, maintaining all that code and trying to maintain a server and all that stuff. It's all in the cloud now. You just go out, sign in, and they're constantly coming up with new things. You can edit and make your own if you want, but they're so ubiquitous now. You don't really need to manage and build your own. It's still possible. There's still a lot of those you find on GitHub. If you just search GitHub for phishing kits, you can find them. So
dark web base. That's what's the best way to research.
Best way to learn. So I'm a big fan of Black Hills Information Security and Trusted Sec. Both those guys have Discord servers and lots of groups out there, whether it's, dark web, pen testing, mentoring, they have all kinds of different rooms out there. So look for invites or a way to get invited to their Discord servers, and you can find all kinds of good resources and ask a lot of questions, and they're very helpful out there. And like I said, lots of information in different rooms, depending on what you're interested in.
I think like the majority of people who receive questions like that, especially like I've been on the BHIS Discord for a while, and I've found a lot of great resources there. The YouTube channel has over 1,000, like something like almost 2,000 hours of video content.
Yeah,
like it's huge. They have so much great information, and then the people there, like I always hear this horror story about, oh, I tried to like talk to someone, this elite hacker guy, and they totally shut me down. It's like, well, that was like the one bad experience, but I think most people are very open to helping out, and like, everyone I've asked for help with anything, especially in cybersecurity, everyone's been very willing to, at least push me in the right direction. Good. Or like, I don't know, Google it, or whatever,
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that because it wasn't always that the case. And John Strand, who started Black Hills, he's awesome. He's a great guy, and he's very against that. Putting other people down and saying, "Hey, you noob, you should know that." He's very against that, so he'll call that out if he sees it.
Yeah, and he actually, they just did a talk about a week ago about mentoring, and that was one of the big things he said is like, if you're like higher level, you really got to come down and meet people where they are, or else we're gonna have like this huge disparity where there's like all these like this like small group of really, really smart people, and then there's just like large group of people who need to learn, who want to learn. So I think like what he does is really bridge that gap very well.
The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. So
we actually do not use Splunk. If a client environment has Splunk, then we'll use that to cull through the logs and find the data that we need for our investigation. We have a log server that we've built through open source solutions and have written a tremendous amount of code around it. So in our client environments, we have that data.
Try Hack Me, Hack the Box, all good ones. Trying to think what's the other one.
There's quite a few of them out there.
Those are coming up like crazy now. Range Force has a free offering now as well. There's a community edition of that. But yeah, they're I say try them all and find something you like. I know the Try Hack Me is pretty good. I've played on there a little bit. I haven't looked at the Range Force stuff yet, but it's been on my screen for a while. Eventually I'll get around to it. But and then running your own, CTF games or finding games and doing your own. We've done some of that in the SOCs I've worked in the past, where we just downloaded the free framework for the Facebook CTF and just kind of built our own with some guys that knew how to do packet captures and kind of build some of that stuff, do malware analysis, things like that. So yeah, I'm a big fan of doing the CTFs, and like I said, they're constantly coming up with new ones. Black Hills has their own Range Force as well, I believe, and I think it's pay what you want. I think it's really inexpensive. So
there are quite a few like subscription-based models that are out there too that comes up with different tests and different trophies, if you will, on a monthly basis.
Yeah, they're all good for practice. You never know when you're gonna need some of those skills.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's about it. We're about 5 minutes over, and I think we all got meetings to get to. So thank you so much for coming out, for joining us here, and thank you for all of our participants. I did have one question. Did you want to send out these slides to our participants today?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to get that to me, then I will go ahead and forward it to all of the people who attended, and we look forward to seeing everyone for the next one in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, NTP.
Thank you.